Well, all right. Welcome today, as you guessed, to the end of the book of Genesis. And so that's where we are today. In fact, we're going to start in chapter 29. So we're going to cover about 21 chapters today. Really? Well, that's the plan. That's the plan. Really, I'm going to tell you the way that we do it. If you notice, I've already been past chapter 29 last week, but I'm trying to play out the theme. So we ran Isaac to the end of his life, and then we looked at the generations of Ishmael and the generations of Esau, and now we're picking up again with the generations of Jacob, which means we have to go back and pick up with Jacob again. And so I've already said some things, and in fact, I said some things incorrectly last week. I want to fix this, only one that I know of. But I mentioned that Jacob stole the teraphim. The teraphim are the household idols of his father Laban. It really wasn't Jacob, it was Rachel that did that. And we'll see some of that today. But Jacob, I misremembered the account, and I'm still searching for why I misremembered it. There's another piece that I want to tell you, but I can't find it, and so which means I may have made it up, and which is altogether possible. And so if I made it up, that's not a good thing. So I won't say anything else until I go back and look at it. You have to understand, please understand, I say that jokingly. I read so much stuff that keeping it in order and keeping it together is, if you remember, there's only two places in the Bible that these household idols are mentioned. The other one is with Michael. Do y'all know who Michael is? The girl Michael? David's wife, Saul's daughter, and she took some of these teraphim and made them look like David was still in the bed, dressed him up, put a wig on him and all that kind of stuff, and so that David could escape. And it's possible that in the telling of those two stories, I've misremembered it all. So just to conclude that for right now, it was Rachel that stole it from her dad Laban, and in their exit. So that brings us to chapter 29 when Jacob meets Rachel. You're like, they just escaped. No, I'm going back to the beginning because I've entitled this portion. Okay, by the way, Hebrews 11:21, by faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. This is the demonstration in the hall of faith that Jacob was serving the Lord by faith when we get there later in the morning. I entitled this Jacob and His Women. I couldn't find an actual photograph of Leah and Rachel. I think Polaroids weren't around then. And so these two look like Disney princesses, but I'm telling you, this is Jacob and Leah. This is Rachel and Leah. But those weren't his only women. So I'm just going to tell you the story of Jacob and his women because that leads to Jacob and his sons. You have to know the women before you know the sons. And so this is where we are. So starting in chapter 29, verse 1, then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the sons of the east. By the way, does anybody know why he went back? Because he wasn't supposed to marry a Canaanite. If you remember, Esau did. Esau married two Canaanites. Jacob went back to his father's family, and that's why he's going back to the land of the sons of the east. He looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep. Now the stone on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, they would then roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. Does anybody know why they did that? Because this wasn't a well like we think of it. If you think of the, where you lower the bucket and then come up, this was really a spring. This was that kind of a well, so they had to block it up so the water wouldn't continually flow. unplug it, the water would flow, the sheep would water, and then they'd plug it back up. And which still means they could still take buckets or jars or whatever they had to get the water from it, but that's why you would plug up a well in that case. My brothers, where are you from? We're from Haran. And he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. And he said to them, is it well with him? And they said, it is well. And here is Rachel, his daughter, coming with the sheep. Now, what you're about to see is love at first sight. You're about to see, playing out right before our eyes, the exact moment that Adam saw Eve, which is, woohoo! And that's what you're about to see. He said, behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered. And they roll the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. So when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he related to Laban all these things. Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh, and he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. That's a great thing. 7 years seemed just like a twinkling of an eye because of his love for her. Laban tricks Jacob. If you continue to read in chapter 29, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of it, but you'll know that on the wedding day, in fact, the wedding night, when Jacob goes in and he gets married, it seems, according to the text, that he doesn't realize until the next morning that it was Leah, which is interesting in lots of ways to me. But it all has to do with their customs and the way that they do marriages and all those kinds of things. So Laban tricks Jacob. Give me her wife, verse 21. In the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and Jacob went into her. Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. And so now he's married to the wrong sister. He confronts Laban, and Laban says, well, it's our custom to let the older one get married first. So nanny, nanny, boo-boo, you're into it. It's interesting that Jacob is the deceiver, and yet he gets deceived by his daddy. He has met his match, in other words. Well, almost. Rereading all of this, I was reminded how as a child, Vacation Bible School, Sunday school, my own parents' teaching, all of the picture books that I read, all of that stuff. As a child, I had this vision of the people of the Old Testament as just the most saintly people that you'd ever meet. You know, that they were just godly. And I want you to know they were far from godly. When we look around and see the mess that we're in today, and we're like, well, how have things gone this bad? I just want you to know that things have always been bad. There have always been people that try to manipulate the circumstances in order for their best interest. Laban does that here, and so let's see, verse 26. Laban says, "It's not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one." That's like their honeymoon. Okay, so complete the honeymoon with this one, and we will give you the other also for the service which you shall serve me with for another 7 years. So if we're not careful with that, and we don't read this, you'll think he worked 7 years for Leah, Then he worked 7 more years for Rachel, but that's not the way it worked. He worked 7 years for Leah, married Rachel at the end of the week, and then worked 7 more years for Rachel, which is all kinds of bizarre. And oh, by the way, both of these girls had maids that came with them, and they figure into this story as well. That's why this is called Jacob and his women. I almost titled it Jacob and the Girls, but it's not just the girls, not just Rachel and Leah, it's also the 2 maids that come with him. So this is all kinds of crazy. And not the Bible crazy, but you understand, this is just not the ideal situation. This is far from ideal, and if you think it's ideal, just wait, there's more. And so Laban follows through. Jacob is married to Leah, the one that he doesn't love. In fact, literally it says that she's the hated one. And so it's possible that Jacob despised her, not just because she was the wrong one, but because she was a constant reminder of his father-in-law's trickery. And so, and an extra 7 years of labor. And so you can imagine, I don't want you to think my 3 sons here. That's what I'm trying to, this is not Leave It to Beaver and everything is okay in the Jacob household. This is as bad as you can imagine, and maybe even worse than that's going on. And so now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, that is literally hated, verse 31, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So it seems at this point, for sure, God made Leah very fruitful. That's clear. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb. So that's clear. But it's possible that because of the animosity between these sisters and in this household, that God closed up Rachel. It's possible. It's not explicit like it is, but it says, but it is the hinge. God opened Leah's womb, but Rachel was barren. Now, for sure, we know God is sovereign over all of this stuff, but it seems as you read it that that's the way it reads. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben. So Yahweh blesses Leah, and so let's see. He opened her womb, and she bore 4 sons to him. Reuben, from the Lord's seas. So the Lord saw that she was unloved, opened her womb, and so she named him Reuben. If you remember Hagar, you remember she's the one that called out that the Lord was Jehovah Roi, the Lord sees. That Roi, Reuben, it's the same verb cognate. And then Simeon, from the Lord hears. Maybe from Shema. And when we get to Deuteronomy, we'll hear the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. Shema means hear. And so Simeon, perhaps from the Lord hears. Levi from the third one. And so Reuben and Simeon and Levi, the third one. And then Judah from I will praise the Lord. And so, verse 35, and she conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing. And so, obviously this didn't happen in a week. All right, so there are 4 children that are born. Although it's possible that those 4 sons are born in the 7 years that Jacob is working off his indenturedness for Rachel. So it happened fairly quickly. Names are all right through there. In verse 32, 33, 34, The Lord has seen my affliction in 32, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved. Verse 34, this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. I want you to just hear the yearning in Leah. All right, so I don't want to just pass over Leah. We often make fun of her because she's the doughy-eyed one. She's the one with weak eyes. But certainly, she was unloved. She's kind of the spinster sister who was given through trickery. Yeah, the door prize, the unwanted door prize, kind of the white elephant door prize. You know, somebody brought something that somebody else gave them last Christmas that they didn't really like, and they brought it, and that's what's happened. And I don't mean to make fun, because this is, just recognize that this is now seething in this family. This turmoil is being built up. And so, and Rachel is bitter. We often think of Rachel as the good one. I mean, you know, just think about the way that you remember your stories from Vacation Bible School. And you know, Rachel is kind of the, we take Ruth, and we take Ruth's character, and we superimpose them on Rebekah, who was a schemer in her own right. I mean, she was Laban's sister. They didn't fall far from the tree. Rebekah's the one that manipulated Jacob's scheme with Isaac at the expense of Esau. So, I mean, all of this is just carrying on generation after generation. And you say, what should we get from this? Well, I'll tell you ahead, this is God's grace that any of us made it through this stuff. It's just the fact that God is doing His work in spite of the sins and weaknesses of people. And you have to see that. Anyway, you'll see it more as this thing unfolds, because you hadn't seen nothing yet. I mean, this gets crazier and crazier. So Rachel, chapter 30, verse 1, Rachel saw that she was barren. She bore Jacob no children, and she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." You know, and Jacob said, "Am I in the place of God?" Now remember that, because he's not the only one that's going to say that this morning. Well, obviously I said it, but I mean, you're going to hear Joseph say it at the end. I mean, you'll hear Jacob say it again when he's with Joseph and the others there in Egypt. I forgot who said it. I think Joseph said it. We'll uncover that as we get there. "Give me children, else I die. Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" She said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I may have children." This should sound to you just like Sarah. So a faithless act by giving a maid. So she gave her maid Bilhah as her wife, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me, and has indeed heard my voice, and has given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. The word Dan means judge. This idea of judge, justice, vindicated, all of those words come from the same root word. And so this is Dan. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. By the way, those aren't miraculous conceptions. Okay, I don't want to get too explicit to you, but this is a messed up family now. This isn't just Abraham going to Hagar one time and having Ishmael. This is now a multi-wife affair. Whatever. Anyway, this is as the world turns on steroids. Yeah. So, yeah, and it gets worse. Yes, we still haven't seen it at the end of this yet. And so when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. All right, so now, not just Bilhah, but now Zilpah, and she has a wife. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "How fortunate!" So she named him Gad, which means fortune. So now what you should see here is this competition between two sisters over one husband with four women. And it's still not bad. I mean, it's still not as bad as it's going to get. So Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "Happy am I, for women will call me happy." She named him Asher. This word Asher you'll hear again in Psalm 1. Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. This word Asher, blessed, is also the same idea that Jesus used in the Sermon on the Mount. Oh, the happinesses of the man. Blessed. This is that word. It's the happinesses of, and so Asher's name is happy, happiness. So Gad and Asher. Let me make sure I skipped Naphtali. That's who I skipped. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. So Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again, the second one. So we have four kids. We have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And then we have two from the maid, which are Dan and Naphtali. With mighty wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister, verse 8. So Naphtali means wrestling. And then Leah, to not be outdone by her sister, gave her maid, who bore a fortunate one, Gad. Maybe that's where Creedence Clearwater Revival got fortunate son from, maybe not. Gad. And then Leah's maid Zilpah bore a second son. So now we've got 8 sons with 3 women. 4, 2, and 2. Now in the days of the wheat harvest, verse 14, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field. So the oldest son went out and found mandrakes and brought them to his mother Leah. And Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you." This is Jacob. "Therefore my husband may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So there seems to be some kind of manipulation by the favored wife that cut off Jacob's relations with Leah, the first wife. And now, because she wants the mandrakes that Reuben brought back, she's willing to say, "I'll let you have our husband for tonight if you'll just give me those mandrakes." So this is Rachel, Leah, and the mandrakes. I'm telling you, this is as wicked as any family could be. But wait, there's more. And so when Jacob came in from the field in the evening, then Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." Now, I'm just going to say something. At no point in all of this reading has Jacob put up any kind of fuss. I mean, I don't know why. I'm not trying to imply anything. I just want you to know that he is not practicing wisdom with his own household. And it just gets worse. What's that? He's not working hard enough. I think he's working really hard, maybe. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Those 7 years of work. Anyway, so verse 17, God gave heed to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Now, this isn't Jacob's 5th son. This is Leah's 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar. So Issachar means wages. Leah conceived again and bore a 6th son to Jacob. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good gift. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. Even now, after the 2 maids, and this is the 10th son to Jacob, Leah still just wants the love of her husband. That's all that she wants. She gave the mandrakes so that she could have his love. she names her sons. All she wants is to be accepted by Jacob. And it seems that she never was. It seems as if Leah was never accepted. She wasn't accepted by her dad. That her dad tricked Jacob into having her. I hate to overplay an illustration, but I've used this one the last 2 weeks, or the last 2 times we've been together. I might as well just use it. It reminds me of Downton Abbey. Poor Edith. Poor Edith. Myra and I are watching through it again just because it's good. It's good to watch, and it's fun, and you don't have to put much thought into it the third time through. And we just got to Edith. Sybil now is married, Mary is married, and Edith was jilted at the altar by Sir Anthony, whatever his last name was. And when she's lying on her bed crying, and Sybil and Mary are there, and she looks up and sends them away. That's kind of like Leah. She sends them away, and then the next morning she's at breakfast, and Matthew says, "Why are you down here with us?" And she says, "Isn't that what spinster aunts do?" Poor Edith. Well, that's Leah in this story. She's hoping against hope that her husband would accept her, and he never does. So don't miss the pathos, the emotion that's taking place here just by reading through the scripture trying to get to Joseph. And that's really the way we do it a lot. But this family is so messed up. And it plays out with the sons later on. And it plays out with the tribes of Israel even later on than that. And so don't miss this energy that's taking place behind closed tent flaps or whatever. This is lots and lots of weirdness in this family. By the way, this is God's chosen family. Don't miss that. Don't miss that. This is God's chosen family. And this is how messed up they are. And it's not because God made a mistake. It's because God extends His grace to sinners. And so even as we deal among ourselves and see how really messed up our decisions can be and our actions can be, know that none of us have earned God's favor because of what we've done. Because of Judah's son. You're going to see how messed up Judah is, and then recognize that his great-great-great-great-grandson is the one who stepped into our place, bore our sin debt, and made us right with God in the midst of all this sin. Yeah. So Leah bears a sixth son and names him Zebulun, which means honor. He was the honored one. And then Leah bears a daughter and names her Dinah. Don't forget Dinah, because we're going to see that this is all part of the order of the blessing. So Dinah is born. Then God remembered Rachel, verse 22. Those words are incredible words all throughout the Bible. They run in exactly the same way that but God runs in the New Testament. If you want to go ahead and look at Samson, you remember Samson, God's judge. He does all this. He finally gets his eyes put out. He's hooked up to the millstone, and they made fun of him all the time. And then God remembered him. The hair on his head began to grow, it says. This idea of God remembering is not that he had forgotten, but remember, it's his shifting of his gaze back to that person. They're now in the spotlight. That's what it means. That God is now focused back on Rachel. He gave heed to her and opened her womb. So she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. she named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord give me another son." Later, just to finish off all of this, later Rachel gives birth to Benjamin. She dies in childbirth. The pain, she names him Ben-Oni, which is child of my suffering, son of my sorrow, son of my pain. And in honor of his favorite wife, Jacob changes his name, because she dies in childbirth, changes his name to Benjamin, son of my right hand. And so these are the 12 sons and one daughter. There may have been more daughters. We don't know that, but that one daughter is significant, and we'll see her in a second. But those 12 sons, or those 12 tribes of, well, not 12 tribes, 12 sons of Israel. And the reason why I said not tribes is because Joseph is not a tribe. And, excuse me, sorry. And so the 12 sons of Jacob. I went back and showed you all of that because I want you to see that they were all birthed in strife. It was all of this court intrigue, if this was a palace. All of this intrigue that goes on in the family, and the sons carry it on as we go further. So, last time I talked about Laban pursuing Jacob. We talked about their getting away. Jacob goes to Esau. He's restored with Esau. And that leads us up to chapter 34. So fast forward to 34. The other parts were more about Jacob than the sons. And so I introduced you that last week. So now what I want to show you is that Jacob's sons, the first three, were disqualified to lead the family through their own treachery. But before I do it, I want to tell you what we mean by lead the family. Because this isn't just who's in charge of the family. What we are tracing is the promised line from God. This lineage that went not through Cain, but through who? Seth. Seth, not through Cain, but through Seth. Then not through Ishmael, but through Isaac. Not through Esau, but through Jacob. And not through Reuben or Simeon or Levi, but through Judah. Not through, I can't remember the next one's name. Perez is the breach. What was Perez's brother's name? The twins that were born to Tamar. We'll get there. I tried to do it ahead of time, and I just can't remember. So, that's right, Noah's 3 sons. So what you need to see is that God is tracing a lineage of promise that's going to end up with Jesus. That's what you have to see. This is not about all the sons of Abraham, even though Abraham had many sons, had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord, right? So I just want you to know, this isn't about all the sons of Abraham. It's not about all the sons of Terah. It's not about all the sons of Jacob. It's not all. We are tracing a line that comes to Jesus, and then that wraps it all back around that by faith in Christ, we're all now sons of Abraham, this promise that was given. So this is an intentional thing. This is not Jim, the Christian, going back and saying, okay, let me just rewrite this. This is what God is doing through the Old Testament, tracing a lineage that reappears in Matthew as he traces the lineage, that reappears in Luke as he traces the lineage, and then goes all the way back in John's vision in Revelation chapter 5 that said, "Who is worthy to unloose this, to break the seals?" And then one who was like the Lion of the tribe of Judah. You see, this is the story. And so, anyway, I get weepy because God included a lot of rascals to save you and me. In fact, He included a lot of rascals to save a lot of rascals. And that's really the story of what God has done for the last 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 years, is He is saving sinners who aren't worthy of being saved. And we see it just play out. So then in chapter 34, we have the rape of Dinah. So Dinah, this sister, who was lots younger, we don't know how much younger, but lots younger, at least, I'd guess, at least 7 years younger than Reuben. And that is if Leah had one child every year until that time. There may have been longer time than that. So she's at least 7 years younger than her oldest brother Reuben. They go, and a man by the name of Shechem sees her, falls in love with her. The Bible says it is, so it says he loved her, but I agree with you. I'm just using Bible words. Falls in love with her and takes her. Now, the reason why, there's a lot of things that we could talk about that. But it didn't end after he took her. He continued to want her. And so that's why it would be, you could say that it was love in that way. But, so when Jacob's sons, when actually Leah's sons heard about it, as you can imagine, they were incensed. And so Shechem kept wanting to marry her, and so they tricked Shechem. And they said, here, we just don't intermarry with anybody. So in order for you to take her as your wife, everybody in the village needs to be circumcised. All the men. And just so you know, we're not talking about just the 7-day-old babies. We're talking about all the men need to be circumcised. And so they did. This was how much Shechem wanted to marry Dinah. So they all did that, and the Bible says, these are not Jim Collier's words, these are the Bible words, while they were still in pain, Simeon and Levi strapped on their swords and went down there and killed everybody. Just destroyed. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, took Dinah from Shechem's house, and went forth. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." But they said, should he treat our sister as a harlot? I'm sorry, I started one verse too late. Now it came about on the third day when they were in pain, the two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took a sword and came upon the city unaware and killed every male. They killed every mother's son. They just killed them all. Because of this unreasonable, unjust action, they were passed over to lead their family. This is their activity that caused them to be passed over to lead out in Jacob's family, which leads us just one. That is Reuben. Reuben now is the firstborn. Levi and Simeon have disqualified themselves, and then comes Judah. In one verse, chapter 35 and verse 22, it says, "It came about while Israel was dwelling in that land." By the way, Israel is Jacob. "While Israel is dwelling in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it." So this should remind you of another time. This is exactly the offense that Absalom did in order to show that he was king over David. He went in and took all the concubines of David and lay with them, profaned them, really in the open, in Absalom's case. But in this case, Reuben did that with Bilhah, and it's an act of usurping your father's authority. That's what this is. Reuben was saying, I'm in charge now. And because of that, he was passed over. This is the reason why none of the first three of Israel's sons were used to. This is why they're not the sons of promise. You should see a theme by now. I spoke of it earlier, but the theme of the younger leading the older is all throughout the Bible. It means that God does things in ways that we would not think they should be done. To quote Isaiah, His thoughts are above our thoughts. His ways are higher than our ways. So God does things in different ways. So what you just have seen is Simeon and Levi and Reuben all disqualifying themselves. Verse 22 is the only mention of it here, but it's mentioned for that purpose because the first three are now overseen. Leads us to man number 4, son number 4. I've mentioned him on several occasions. Go to Genesis 38. By the way, I'm intentionally skipping chapter 37 for a second. I'll get back to it. Because chapter 37 picks up Joseph, and we see Joseph as almost one. Well, I'll get to him in a second. So, chapter 38. And it came about at that time, that's after Joseph was sold into slavery, that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him the watcher, Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan, strength. She bore still another son and named him Shelah, and it was at Shezib that she bore him. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn. You can see that this is a lot of time passing. It's not all happening at once. This is happening while Joseph is in Egypt. Okay, so this is happening. So takes a wife, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Now this is interesting, because this is the promised line. This is Judah's line. And the firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, and so the Lord killed him. Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her. He's talking about the Levirate marriage. A Levirate marriage said that the next brother would take the wife of the dead brother, and the first son that was born from that union would be the namesake of the dead brother. Okay, so he would carry on, and with that namesake would also go the inheritance. So the inheritance that was due so when Judah dies, his money, 2/3 of it goes to Er's dead, so Onan is supposed to have a relation with Tamar in order to prolong Er's line. Is that clear as mud? Everybody stay with me? All right. Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. That's what I just explained to you. He knew the offspring would not be his, so when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life also. Now, I told you it keeps getting worse. I mean, this just keeps getting worse. So, what could have happened is that Onan knew that his son was not going to be his and declined the marriage. If that would happen, in the public square, Tamar would spit in his face, throw a shoe, spit in his face, and that would be the shame of him not fulfilling his role as the brother-in-law. Instead of receiving the shame, in essence, now I'm going to put words in the Bible's mouth here, but I want you to capture the sentiment of what's happening. The Bible doesn't say this. This is Jim saying it. This is my interpretation. But he, at best, used Tamar. At worst, he raped her. Because he acted unbecomingly toward her. So, if he didn't want to have a child, he should never have slept with her. But what he did was sleep with her and then deny her the very thing which was the cause for him to sleep with her. Is everybody with me? You understand? So, there's a song of my generation that speaks of free milk and a cow. That's what he did. This is no marriage that was a good marriage. Now, later generations have used this to talk about, boy, I'm in weird waters here, but to talk about masturbation. In fact, it used to be called, now my generation doesn't know this, but your generation maybe does, it used to be called onanism, named after Onan. But Onan did not do that. He just didn't fulfill his role. He didn't complete the task with his sister-in-law. Okay, am I blushing yet? Yeah. Good. She can see it. But this is important. It's so important that God killed him for it, because he didn't do what was required of him. Which leads us to Shelah, the youngest son. Now, after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, before that. So let's see. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, verse 11, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought, I'm afraid that he too may die like his brothers." So instead of Judah thinking that this is God's judgment on his wicked sons, he thinks that the curse is Tamar. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now, I'll just tell you this. Judah lied to her. He said, "You go and wait for my youngest son so that he can perform his duty," but he had no intention of giving his youngest son to Tamar. So after considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah. So what we have is this huge party for sheep shearing. It was a festival. They went out. You can see this throughout the rest of the Bible, that this was a big deal to go out and shear his sheep. And so Tamar, recognizing that Judah had no plans to wed her to the son, Shelah, she dresses up like a harlot or a prostitute and goes and sits on the corner of a road where Judah is going to pass by. Judah sees her and says, "How much for a night with you?" These are my words. How much for a night with you? She says, a sheep. No, actually, it's the other way. She says, how much will you pay me? And he says, I'll give you a sheep. And he says, but I don't have it now. Give me a hamburger today and I'll gladly pay you on Tuesday. Wimpy. And so she said, what are you going to leave me as a down payment for that sheep that you're going to give me later? And so he gave her his signet, that is his seal, the thing that marks it as his cord, maybe a bracelet, maybe a thing that hung the seal around his neck. So his seal, his cord, and his staff, all ways in those days to identify somebody else. So she takes it. Well, after the sheep shearing thing is done, he comes back to give a sheep, and he can't find her because she went back and then got dressed back in her mourning clothes, her widow clothes. Well, then 3 months later, 3 months went by. He can't find this harlot. In fact, he asks around, where's the harlot that sat on the corner? And they say, we don't have a harlot that sits on the corner. And so he can't find her. So he says, don't go and find her, or else I'll be made a laughingstock. Because it means that this prostitute got one over on me. So don't go and do that. 3 months later, somebody came and informed and said, your daughter-in-law, the widow, is pregnant. She's played the harlot. And he said, he just loses his mind, gets mad, and said, the reason why I say that is because he confers on her something that was never done for an adulteress. And that is, he says, take her out and burn her. Now, Tamar, being shrewd already, I mean, she's a pretty heady gal already. She waits until they're dragging her out and says, hold on, I know who the father is. And they say, who? And she says, whoever these belong to. It was like she said, whoever this belongs to. Well, that's my picture on this. That's what Judah said. Oh my goodness, that's my staff, and that's my cord, and that's my signet, and that's my child. Or children, actually. They were twins. So what he really said, what the Bible records him saying is, she is more righteous than me. She is more righteous than me. And that is the story of Judah and Tamar. He never went back to Tamar again. That he didn't take her as his wife, although that would have been okay. I know it's a weird world, but he could have stepped in as the father-in-law to continue the line with his first son didn't, and eventually that's what he did, but he did it not wanting to. He did it because Tamar took advantage of it. And by the way, Tamar is the first recorded woman in Jesus' line. Tamar, this lady. Not a Jew, not a Hebrew, not one of Abraham's children. And yet, here she is. Again, just a picture of God's grace. The Lord, and last week I said that the Lord was sovereign over sin. I want you to see that all of this, all of the 4 wives of Jacob, and now Judah and Tamar, all of this was sinful acts. All of this. Lock, stock, and barrel. Laban given the wrong, all of this was sin. And yet, to quote almost the youngest son of Jacob, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And that's what we see throughout this. In fact, that marks, if in 15 minutes, if I can get through with Joseph's life, that marks the ending of Genesis. That's one of the last things that's stated there at the end of Genesis. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. And that really encapsulates all of this book of Genesis all the way through. So, are you ready for Joseph? All right, here we go. Everybody okay? Nobody tired? All right, I've been talking a lot, and I'm leading you through this family. We're going back now to chapter 37. Back to chapter 37. And I want you to see. Oh, by the way, what I really wanted to show you is, isn't it interesting that Simeon and Levi are disqualified, that Reuben is disqualified, and that Judah is exalted? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And it's just God's grace. It's just God's plan. And by the way, it's almost as if Tamar rescues Judah. Even in her own treachery, and she wasn't thinking like that. She was thinking about for herself, how am I going to be, how am I going to be taken care of? But her actions rescued Judah and his prospects. Just interesting. And then I want you to see that Yahweh, the Lord, exalts Joseph. We have jealousy among the brothers. Is there any reason why does anybody have any questions on why there's jealousy among the brothers? I think I've just shown you that this is a crazy family. This is a crazy family. There was jealousy because Jacob was just a bad father. He just did not do this well. So it says, now Israel loved Joseph, verse 3, more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a multicolored tunic, a many-colored coat of many colors is what we call it. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. And so this is not good. Then Joseph had a dream. You remember the first dream, all the sheaves of wheat bowed down and worshipped him. And they didn't like that. And then he dreamed another dream where the sun and the moon and the stars bowed down to him. And they really didn't like that. And even Jacob didn't like that. These two dreams, by the way, were going to come true. Although we often talk about Joseph as if he was a perfect character, just like everybody else. But it seems as if Joseph liked to flaunt his position as most favored son. And so nobody is righteous completely in this. So he tells them their dreams. Hey, guess what, y'all? Y'all are going to worship me. That is not a way to win friends and influence people. To quote Dale Carnegie. That's right. So jealousy among the brothers. They get mad at his dreams. He comes out to check on them one day, and they have a plan. They saw him from a distance in verse 18, and they plotted to put him to death. One said to another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now then, come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard this, the firstborn heard this, and rescued him out of their hands, and said, Let not him take his life. Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into the pit that is in this wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of his hands to restore him to his father." So Reuben plans, throw him in a pit, and later, when they're all gone, to come and get him and return him to his father. It's interesting where loyalty comes in all this story. It's just interesting. Reuben stands up for him here. Later, Judah stands up for Benjamin. And they're just interesting things. So it came about, verse 23, when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, that multicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal, and as they raised their eyes, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brother, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." This is so much better. "Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he's our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up, lifted Joseph out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? I'm responsible. What's going to happen?" So they said, we're just going to say that a wild beast killed him, so we're going to put blood on it and take it back to his father. And that's what they did, and Jacob went into mourning. And in fact, that mourning lasted, not that morning like in the early morning, his grief lasted for a long, long, long time, all the way up through the Egypt experience. If we were an old 1950s television show, we would say, meanwhile, back at the ranch, and we would find that Joseph is now in Egypt, sold into slavery to work for a man named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was a good guy. Potiphar employed Joseph. Joseph worked his way up. The Lord's hand was on Joseph, and he was elevated in the house of Potiphar. But Potiphar wasn't the only one who thought that Joseph was a swell guy. Potiphar's wife also thought that Joseph was a swell guy and wanted to have her way with him. He would not do it, and so finally, disgusted with his lack of receiving her overtures, she cried rape. And Joseph was cast into prison. While in prison, Joseph was met up with two other people who were thrown into prison. By the way, that's the end of Potiphar's story. Now we're in the prison. The Pharaoh's baker and the cupbearer, the wine taster, were also thrown in prison. They had dreams. Joseph says, only God can interpret dreams. Tell me what your dreams are, and I'll ask the Lord to tell me what they are. And so they told them the dreams, and to the wine bearer goes first, and he says, hey, what it means is in 3 days you're going to be restored to Pharaoh. Well, that emboldened the baker. The baker's like, well, mine's like that. Mine has 3 loaves of bread. What does that mean? And he says, in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to kill you, and you're going to be dead. So that's indeed exactly what happened. The last thing that Joseph said to the cupbearer was, hey, remember me? And the wine bearer went and served and forgot Joseph, and Joseph stayed in prison. But then Pharaoh has a dream, and it triggered something in the wine taster's mind. He's like, oh yeah, there's a Hebrew slave in prison that can tell you your dream. And so Pharaoh calls him out, and he says, tell me my dream. And so Joseph does. If you remember, there were fat cows and skinny cows and all of that, and it all ended up being that you're going to have 7 years of plenty, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine. And so in the 7 years of plenty, what you ought to do is store up for the 7 years of famine and be ready. And so Pharaoh made Joseph the governor over his granary, or the one who was oversee this implementation. In the meantime, he has 2 sons, and he names them Manasseh and Ephraim. And so he has these 2 sons, and they're there. Manasseh is making to forget, and Ephraim is fruitfulness. And so now Joseph is in charge of all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Now that's pretty incredible. Why do you think that happened? Because God remembered Joseph. Because it was God's plan. God is using someone to rescue his family. And so the 7 years of famine come. Jacob, the father, sends the 10 brothers to Egypt. He keeps Benjamin back. Why does he keep Benjamin back? Because he doesn't want what happened to Joseph to happen to Benjamin. And so he keeps Benjamin back. Joseph imprisons the brothers. He knows who they are. They don't know him. He imprisons the brothers. And then he keeps Simeon and sends the rest home with food and for Benjamin. Bring me back Benjamin, and I'll give you food for your family. Jacob won't hear of it. And so who knows how long, and I'm not asking that, nobody knows, it's not recorded in the Bible, how long Simeon stays in jail in Egypt because Jacob refused to send Benjamin back with the brothers. Well, eventually they run out of food again, and so he sends Benjamin and his brothers. He's not going to do it again. He says, I'm just going to send the 9 of you back. And Judah says, if you do that, they're going to kill us. So I will be surety for Benjamin, my life for his. Now, friends, I want you to know that Judah is living up to his namesake. He is the one he says, I will be the substitute. If this happens, I'll die. Now, that's an incredible foreshadowing. It's just a blip. It's like the blip in Genesis 3:15, which says, "In the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent." It's just a blip, but it's the blip of Judah's substitute again. And so Joseph imprisons the brothers. Benjamin returns with the brothers. Judah says, I'll be a surety for him. I know I'm getting close. Just hang on. No, hang on for 4 more minutes. Judah stands up for Benjamin, and they go back, and Joseph is going to keep Benjamin now. Remember, he gives them all food. They're going to leave, and he hides his cup in Benjamin's bag. He rides back after him, and they arrest him again and say, whoever's got the cup is going to have to come back. Well, it was Benjamin that had the cup. And by the way, through all of this, Joseph is moved to see his brother. He's moved to see all his brothers. He's really, really compassionate toward his brothers. He's not being mean to them. He really is trying to figure out a way to bring them back to himself. And Benjamin is implicated in this thing, and Judah stands up for Benjamin. Judah says, you take me and let him go. And that is also moving to Joseph. It moved Joseph. In chapter 45, by the way, I've told you the story now through all those chapters. Chapter 45 and verse number 7. Then Joseph said to his brothers, verse 4, then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. And they came closer. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. And so all of this God did to save his line. Remember, I'm trying to show you this line. The reason why Jacob's family went to Egypt is because God is preserving them there. It's his way of taking care of them. It's also reminiscent all the way forward when Jesus and Mary and Joseph flee out of Palestine and go to Egypt to fulfill the prophecy. Out of Egypt, my son was delivered. And so all of this is God's work preserving his people. This story with Joseph is an incredible one. He is upright. He is not tainted by the Egyptian culture, and he stands for the Lord. All of them come back. Jacob moves to Egypt, chapter 46. He comes and he's restored. He blesses Manasseh and Ephraim, and then he blesses the other 11. These blessings come true. By the way, the blessings are given in place of Joseph. So in a way, Joseph is lost to Jacob. Remember, he thinks he's dead. And in fact, because he was taken away to Egypt, in a way he was lost to Jacob. And so the two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, become the replacement. They get, in this case, Joseph gets a double portion of blessing for each of his sons. And so this, and then he blesses the other 11, although not all of them is the one that's going to hold the scepter. So this prophecy comes from Jacob as he blesses his sons. And then Joseph, after the death of Jacob, Joseph forgives his brothers in chapter 50. Joseph buried his father, and then in verse 19 of chapter 50, they come before him, fall on their face, and Joseph said, "Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place?" Same thing that his daddy said to Rachel. Now he says to his brothers, "Am I in God's place? Don't worry. Do not be afraid." And then verse 20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive." All of this happened. The selling of Joseph into slavery, his imprisonment, his coming out of prison, his being put Lord over all of Egypt, the brothers coming back, Jacob coming back, the blessings, all of this so that God would preserve a lineage that would lead to Jesus. And this is the book of Genesis. And we have finished. After 12 weeks, we have finished the book of Genesis. Yeah, that is something significant. By the way, I am now there again, by the way, the younger is blessed over the older. Remember, Joseph said, "No, you've done it wrong, Dad." And Dad said, "Nope, I did it right." And then we end there. And then verse 22. I started this by reading 11:21. Now 11:22. "By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. When you go back to the land that was promised to Abraham, take my bones with you. I want to go too." And that, according to the writer of the book of Hebrews, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, was an act of faith, that he believed God. And so, in the same way that Abraham did and others. So I went a little bit longer than I normally go, by about 5 minutes, but I wanted to get done with Genesis. Next week, as the Lord allows, we'll begin Exodus. And so we are now moving rapidly. Woo, like the wind. And so here we are. Any questions about any of this? All right. God bless you. Have a great day.